The possibility of Oregon going 12-0 this year is very real.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time. Once again for Locked On Ducks, I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks, which is why, if you have not already, please like, comment, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. My man, Rian Winter, Sports Chat 503 in the house, friend of the show, overall Oregon fan, legend. We're going to talk recruiting later. We're going to talk tone setters later. But let's start with some schedule talk here, Ryan, because the schedule works out incredibly well. I've talked about it this week on the show. I think it lines up really well for Oregon. They've got a great team. Expectations are high. The media hype is high. To me, it is not just a possibility. It's a very real possibility that Oregon ends the regular season 12-0.
Yeah. Spencer, it's so good to see you, man. I got so much love for you and the whole Locked On family. Hey, man, it really is. I mean, you got your biggest game at home. You know, you probably got your other big game on the road with Michigan. I don't know exactly if that's going to be the second biggest game, but you don't have a big game to start the year in the first three games like you did with the Georgia a couple years ago. You don't have one of those. And so, yeah, you're right. First three games look like it's ready to rumble, and then you get into a UCLA game that looks like another tune-up game to start your Big 12 or Big 10. I'm still kind of stuck in the hybrid of the Big 10 and the Pac-12. My brain is still holding on somehow. But it's somewhere along the line, there's going to be a trip up. It feels like it's bound to happen at some point in time. And whether that's against a big game like in Ohio State, where it's an expected kind of a thing, or whether it's against like Purdue or somebody, you never know what that's going to do and how that's going to work. I tend to think the Wisconsin game at the end of the year might be interesting because they're a team that feels like they don't have that many high expectations, but it feels like they're rising quickly. With their new coach, their new identity, their new thing that they're just kind of getting involved with. So I'm interested to see how the schedule breaks out. It's hard for me to say 100% yes to 12-0 because of all the other times that we've seen it. And the only time I've ever seen it was 12-0, and then we lost the next game. But it is one of those deals where the schedule works out for the Ducks. And I think that the first thing is non-conference checks out, and then in conference, I think it checks out. I think you got some really good matchups. And I think you avoid some big games this year. I think Penn State's one of those teams. It's going to be a really good team this year, and you don't see them. So Michigan maybe takes a step back. I don't know exactly what they're going to be dealing with all the other. It feels like another year of BS they're going to have to deal with on the backside, of the media and everything else to deal with. So I agree. I think the Oregon Ducks can check out, and the media says that they're the ones. The media likes them, which could be a danger zone as well.
Non-zero names, by the way. The Heather Dinniches, the Brett McMurphys of the world. Kirk Herbstreit said, I might pick Oregon to win the national championship. Joel Klatt's got him in his preseason top 5. Like, everybody's very high on Oregon. I think that is deserved with the way that Lanning has put together a roster for this season, the returners that they have, who we're going to talk about again later in the show. By the way, Ryan, 22 days to game 1. How about that? Wow. 22 days away from game 1. That's exciting stuff. But the schedule breaks are numerous. They're not extensive to the point where there are no games where you'd rather have them somewhere else. I think the Wisconsin game is the best example of that. Oregon is about a 10.5-point favorite right now. I've seen larger point spread favorites, particularly on the road, lose games outright. Need we go back to 2021 Ohio State? Oregon on the road, 14.5-point dog, wins the game outright. College spreads, NFL spreads, they're not exactly the same. I think Wisconsin is good. I think they're going to be better in a year or two than they will be this year. Their expectations are not amazing, but they should be a bowl team, and Purdue could be a bowl team. And anytime you play a bowl team on the road, you think, look, if that's a 6-7 win team, yeah, I've seen those sorts of upsets get pulled, and Wisconsin is the one non-scheduling break. Ohio State at home, break, versus having Michigan on the road. You're not going to get both of them at home, of course. Those are the splits you'd want to have this year, home and road. The Wisconsin game, not just that it's on the road, but that it's in November. It's the end of November, and it's the game before Washington. There's a bye in there on November 23rd, but it's November 16th. You're going to be in Madison. It's going to be cold. It's going to be frigid. Oregon's built to play in those sorts of conditions. It just introduces more variables. Wisconsin's a decent team, and it's before Washington, which is the game I think every Oregon fan would say, if there's one game you win this year, my goodness, it has to be Washington.
No, absolutely. I mean, just like Ohio State with Michigan. I mean, we've been having a little bit of a problem with those guys up north. And you're right. I love the way the schedule breaks out this year. And I think that you also got to tip the cap to the Big Ten a little bit. You know, the Pac-12 would have never done a schedule like this for the Ducks. I mean, come on. Think about how many moving parts there were in this thing, because they had already released the schedule with UCLA and USC, remember? And then they had to go back and, now we're adding 2 other schools. We got to rework the whole thing. I think it works out great. And I think, like you said, I think that the Ohio State game at home is going to be the barometer of the whole thing. If you can win the Ohio State game, I think 12-0 is on the table. And if you lose the Ohio State game, obviously 12-0 is off the table. But I think 11-1 is on the table. I do think this is a team that's very special makeup. Biggest reason why is I feel like there's depth. And when you start having depth on a team, you can withstand some things. The Wisconsin game scares me. Like you said it best. Any bowl team, any team that's competitive can get you, and college football is like that. There's going to be some bottom end teams that you should just hammer. I get that, but man, I'm telling you, Wisconsin's a dangerous team at their place. You want to talk about a road environment? You want to talk about a great home environment? Oh baby, and the Ducks should be amped for that, but they are in a classic trap game situation where the next game's a bye, and then you've got your rivalry week, right? So people are definitely going to be looking ahead to that time. That 2-week stretch is going to be pretty sweet. They just got to get through that Wisconsin trip first.
I think the bye actually helps the trap game factor, because I said back in spring when Oregon's schedule came out that Wisconsin's the biggest trap game because Washington's next, but that you only have the next, or that you have to wait an extra Saturday before that game, I think can help players remove it from their minds and focus on the task at hand. And yeah, Dan Lanning teams have had a good track record so far of playing to a standard, not the level of their opponent. I think that's one of the biggest differences from the Mario Cristobal era, where, you know, there were struggles with a 1-5 Cal team at home. Dan Lanning is yet to lose to an unranked team. And, you know, if there was a team this year that could break that trend, Wisconsin could be one. Purdue could be one. You got tough environments. The Purdue game's on a Friday. I mean, ooh boy, yep. That Purdue game. I'm going to be really interested to watch the Boilermakers early in their season to see what sort of product they put on the field in their head coach's second year. I think he inherited kind of a tough situation, and I think Ryan Walters is sharp. He's got a veteran quarterback. That Purdue game is intriguing to say the least. And I'll close with this thought on the Big Ten schedule being favorable in Oregon's first year in the league. It could be a coincidence. I think if you do a 5-year rolling average of, you know, hardest schedule, easiest schedule that Oregon gets from the conference, this will probably be among the most favorable. Like, of the next 3, I would expect each of the next 2 to be tougher than this one because of the breaks that we've talked about. You know, Washington being after a bye and, you know, having that bye in between the road game against Wisconsin, Ohio State at home, Michigan on the road, not having Penn State, not having Iowa, not having USC, which are all going to be, I think, good teams in the league this year. But we're going to flip the script a little bit and talk some recruiting, because Ryan has seen a thing or two, folks. He's the wily veteran that I bring on the show. And no matter what the schedule is, Oregon's going to have high hopes because of the way they're recruiting. Dan Lanning's changed things in Eugene a little bit. That's coming up next. First, let's talk about FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop, but as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. FanDuel, though, lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. They've got everything you want for Oregon. They've got the Washington line, the Ohio State line, Michigan line. It's fun to just poke around in there. Conference championship odds, national championship odds, all available for Oregon. And this summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com, start making the most out of your summer, and get ready for the college football season, which is 22 days away. FanDuel.com, that's where you head. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Back and going again. Post second segment sit with my man Rian Winter and the bird chirping in the background. He's at the Oregon coast because he is the all Oregonian man. That's just the way that he rolls.
These are also live birds. It's not like the Masters. We're not just pumping this into the background.
Yeah, it's not getting pumped in. This is authentic. This is
real crowd noise, like Autzen Stadium. Not like
exactly. Except it's a little bit louder than birds chirping typically when you're at Autzen. But I want to talk about the recruiting aspect of this, Ryan, because we were talking about the schedule, and it'll get tougher in the coming years, and Oregon's got big expectations this year. I said earlier this week, I think that's a good thing because it means Oregon's getting the respect they deserve. They're getting that sort of recognition, and it helps when you're trying to build a program that is a perennial top 5 national title contender, Big Ten title contender every year. These sorts of things. It's not the whole list, or it's not the whole ball game in that sense, but you see the other programs having that sort of hype, and I understand fans that have that apprehension, but I like it. I'm here for it. Part of the reason that Oregon's at that level is because of the way that Dan Lanning has shifted the recruiting expectations for the Ducks. He brings in a top 10 class. He brings in the best class ever in his second season. It feels like that trend is going to continue. Did you ever think in all your years of Oregon fandom that you would see Oregon out recruiting places like Notre Dame or Texas or LSU?
Not really. Again, we talked about being on the edge of the continent. It's very remote out here. It's us and the birds. And no, Dan Lanning is just a different cat, man. I loved his interviews through Media Day. The Big Ten has done a great job as well. They just went out here with Yogi Roth and everything, and they had their time where they gave the interviews with the coaches and everything else. And there's a lot of coach speak. Don't get me wrong. But Dan Lanning is genuine. He's a genuine guy. And I think there's a lot to be said that there's guys who are just not that genuine in this profession. And there's a lot of guys who are, I don't want to be insulting, but, they just come across as not genuine. And they come across as maybe not that interested in their child, more than they're interested in their own success and their own future. I think the two go hand in hand. I think the Dan Lanning, the insight into that relationship with that recruit, talking about they were concerned he was going to leave. Would you make a video? Sure, let's do it. Hey, he sends the video to the mom before he sends it out to millions of people to watch, on Twitter, which we all, of course, did. Grass is damn green, that whole statement. We've talked about this. That's a genuine statement. That's not something that's a sales pitch. That's not something that is going to come across as something that is superficial or surface level. There's depth here. And he also puts a gigantic premium on getting coaches who have the same message and coaches that are dog recruiters as well. I mean, look at Coach Samp, right? Running back coach comes in here, Coach Locke leaves, Samp comes in, and immediately they're talking about him being one of the best recruiting coaches in the country, in the state of Texas, where we know have good running backs historically. And so they've got good
everything in Texas. And by the way, you can't bring up Rashad Samples and not mention the Decorey and Moore connection, because that was 100%. The immediate tinfoil hat for a lot of Oregon fans, and he helped bring that to reality.
Absolutely. And I think that also goes to show the level of relationships that coaches have outside of their position group, right? So you have these coaches, they're working the recruiting trail. There's a bunch of people, they're all on board. I think they make a real a concentrated effort to put on their best authentic self. And I think there's other people who put on a show, a staged kind of a thing. Oh, we got the Lamborghinis. We're going to have the pictures, Brian Kelly on the thing dancing with the guy. And stuff. You don't see that out here. And then when you do see...
Well, I mean, there are recruiting photos.
No. You don't see Dan Lanning dancing behind the guy like he's
No,
doing there.
no, he's just taking.
That felt just
He's just taking a photo
inauthentic to me. That just felt corny to me, and it had to feel corny to other people, maybe even the guy dancing in the front. I just think that Dan Lanning comes off. One of the things we talked about on the West Coast is there people are just too laid back, right? People are just out here. We don't really care about this stuff, whatever else. And then you get the East Coast people, and they're just too driven. They're too focused. They're too, well, what do you have in the Midwest? You have that beautiful blend. And we always talk about those Midwest values. Those Midwest values come across very, very authentic and pure. And I think Dan Lanning is just a different cat. He said it over and over. He said, Oregon is different. We're going to do things different. We're gonna want to push the envelope, but we're not going to push it in a way that people don't feel comfortable with. And when you see these recruits, when they come out, they want to be a part of a team. They want to be a part of a family. And I think Dan Lanning represents that.
The Oregon recruiting conversation at a national level very quickly gets to NIL. And I think my favorite comment of the summer, not of the year, because that would be the grass is damn green in Eugene, but
yes,
maybe at a very close number 2 was when Lanning was on, I think it was the Pat McAfee show, and he was asked about, the NIL and all this sort of stuff, and Kirby Smart, I was in the room when Kirby Smart took a shot at Dan Lanning, and my ears perked up. I was like, where did that come from? What did Dan do to you? Come on, like what are we doing here? And he was talking about unlimited NIL and the big budget and everything. And Lanning went on the Pat McAfee show and basically said, yeah, it's amazing. Kirby's brought in the number 1 class 2 or 3 years in a row with no NIL. It's incredible. It's amazing. And I think that's honestly a great way to phrase it is, yes, Oregon has NIL dollars. They are, if you were to have, 5 tiers in the Power 4 conferences of NIL or 3 tiers or whatever, however many you would create, Oregon is at the top of tier 1. They're not alone. They're not sitting at the mountaintop. Look at what Texas is doing. Yeah. Ohio State, by the way, had took some flack comments, whatever you want to call it, from Matt Rule at Nebraska, saying, yeah, I mean, they're, putting X amount of dollars in here. And then the number got floated around that it was $20 million plus in NIL, which is what a lot of tier 1 schools can put into their rosters with NIL dollars. Oregon's in that sort of range. But this notion, I think it's just Oregon is an easy target because of Nike and Phil Knight. This notion that Oregon's like the only school investing buku bucks in NIL. What do you think that Ohio State roster costs to put together? Because the estimates are over 20 million, and I 100% think that's accurate.
I totally agree. I mean, I remember when the first year of the NIL, Ryan Day said we need $13 million a year to keep this thing up. That was just 2 years ago. Now it's over 20 or something. I mean, there's different levels of interest in providing for your football team. And we know this. Oregon and USC were the only 2 teams in the Pac-12 that even had a profit in their athletic department. So the ideology that there is investment out here, there's an ideology that there's things that are working well out here, and you can provide that. I think, obviously, we know that the Washington State, Oregon State thing has a lot to do with the money. Washington's got tons of money, but they don't really utilize it the same way that Oregon does. Oregon has a hype right now and a buzz right now. And, not to get political, but, when you talked about the conspiracy theorists of Oregon, there's a bunch of conspiracy theorists all of the time about politics, right? Who's behind it? The dark money. Where's
the Illuminati?
The Illuminati. They're just buying a championship. They're just buying a Senate seat or whatever. Well, that stuff goes on, but Oregon hasn't yet bought a national championship. They're still at 0. Everybody reminds us of this. Oregon is just trying to be competitive with the rest of the group. And I do think there's an old money, young money conversation where they're frustrated with it. They're like, who's the new kid? And Ohio State's been doing this for years. Michigan's been doing this for years. But now Oregon joins the conversation. And I do think that there's a little bit of pushback there. I think that historically, Oregon has to do something different to get recruits out here. If that's pay them more, that's going to have to be paying more. We used to do stuff where we would have guarantees where they'd bring the families out for certain games or something because it was hard to get kids out here and say, hey, we're going to recruit. We're going to have to build in some sort of incentive. Even when they weren't doing the money and NIL thing, they were still trying to get families out here because they were saying, hey, well, maybe we can bring your family out to a game or 2 or 3 games a year. That was part of the deal as well. Well, now, obviously, that's all built in. But I do think that Oregon has still a road to climb. I don't know what the exact numbers are, but I know they're not near the very top of NIL money. And to be able to still be competitive, you got to be right with everybody else. I know they obviously are higher than most. Like you just said, there's different tiers to it. But I do think that there's a pretty good gap between the highest end team paying out that money and where Oregon is. And I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. But
Well, I think Oregon is one of the top 5-10 NIL roster teams in the country. I have no problem saying that is likely the case based on a variety of informational sources. But to pretend that Oregon is somehow light years away. You know what SMU can pay kids with their collective? A lot of money. You know what Ohio State's got? They've got a lot. You think Alabama's NIL coffers? You think Georgia's NIL collective is just empty? You think the well's running dry and they're looking like UCLA's athletic department budget when, they went to the Big Ten because they were facing a shortfall of many, many millions of dollars? Like I've always found that to be very disingenuous, the way that Oregon gets discussed in the NIL landscape.
It's low hanging fruit. It's an
incredibly
easy one, right?
So. Yes.
And I think that also Oregon has to prove it. Oregon has to go out there and say, hey man, we're going to build a consistent winner over all of these years. We're going to get recruits. We're going to get transfers. We're going to want to be a place that people want to be. And if you have all that sort of stuff, I don't care how much NIL money you throw at it. You have all the other boxes checked.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. We're going to shift back to the football field. The tone setters that Oregon has on both sides of the ball are part of the reason that expectations are so high. That's coming up next. Coming up right now, though, is Game Time, an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier, both of which are better for you. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. They have killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. You can save up to 60%, that's over half, buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc., whatever you're looking for. You can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. Whatever you want, Game Time's got it. Take the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, Ryan, let's end the week of shows with a mailbag question here, which is always open to all of you. YouTube comments, X, formerly known as Twitter, at @McLaughlin CFB or at Locked On Ducks. Those are ways to get in the mailbag. If you want priority access and all sorts of other perks to become a Locked On Ducks insider, go join the flock over at Subtext. Link in the description below, wherever you listen to or watch this show with a free 14-day trial. This question came from DJ Spencer. Who would you say are the tone setters on defense and offense? Who are a couple players on both sides of the ball that walk that line of aggressiveness that keeps them on edge and wants more? Previous examples, DeAnthony Thomas, LaMichael, Kiko Alonso, and others. He also says, Mr. I came to shut blank down. Some may not know that reference. I think this is one of the reasons that Oregon's expectations are so high going into this year. Ohio State had a bunch of returners announce they were going to forego the NFL draft and play their final year of college eligibility. And that applies to Oregon as well. And I think these guys in many ways are those sorts of tone setters. When you look on the offensive side of the ball, Ryan, Dylan Gabriel's a guy who, has said he explored the NFL options but came back to college, which I think is the right move for him because I don't think the NFL drafting community is in love with Dylan Gabriel because he's on the smaller side. He has a good arm, but it's not great. He's mobile, but he's not fast. He's a very accurate passer of the ball. I think he could find his way onto a roster somewhere. But I think offensively, I look at a guy like Josh Connerly or a Johnny Cornelius. Like, you talk about a tone setter on offense, that's where my mind usually goes. Like, the ultimate tone setter of Oregon football's offense in the last 10 years, I'd go to Penei Sewell. Like, he had that energy about him. He had that exuberance. He had that dog in him. And, oh, by the way, he was a great player. And the offense statistically struggled when he wasn't on the field. These are 2 NFL caliber tackles that Oregon's got. Connerly is the more experienced Duck by 1 year than Cornelius. So that's the guy that I'd go to and say, that's a tone setter.
I love that. I love that. Josh is probably my favorite player, just because I'm good buddies with his dad, and the family is so great, and he's just such a great kid. I mean, he's so smart. That's the one thing about Connerly, is the guy is just very calculated. He's very smart. He's driven. He's got a great body for being a tackle. He's lean. He's like a giant tight end. He's fast. He's not your average big plodding offensive lineman. He's a dude who can carry the weight and can make moves happen. He also is just so strong at the point of attack. I'm so glad you said offensive line. You know, I have a love for offensive and defensive line. That obviously the tone setter is always up front, because you got to win in the trenches. And going into the Big Ten, there's going to be some big boys you got to deal with up there, and there's some different schemes you're going to have to deal with up there, especially defensive line stuff. I think Connerly and Cornelius is going to be fantastic, but my guy Poncho in the middle, dude. I'm telling you, Poncho is, you know, I love the Polynesian guys, because it feels like they bring a little bit different attitude to it. That's not as hyped up. They do the haka and other sort of stuff, but it's not. They stay very mellow. They stay very in tune, very very in touch with the game. And I feel like this year you're going to see some real talent on the offensive line with the Poly guys. There's going to be a variety of guys you're going to rotate through there. I think Quick Rogers is going to get some time. I think Dave Yulee is going to get some time. Obviously, you know, Marcus Harper is going to be a tone setter on that offensive line as well. Matthew Bedford. I mean, the offensive line is solid, but I think the guys who rotate through are also going to bring a lot. You know, Dave gets the face paint going, looking like the Joker or something. You know, Matt Bedford's his attitude is just off the charts, man. His is so good. But I think defensive line people are sleeping on. You know, Keon Ware-Hudson's a very low key guy, so it doesn't feel like he's a guy who's going to be a tone setter. But on the field, he'll give you the hands. I think the guys that just transferred in are going to be really interesting. DJ Harmon really inspired me in his interviews. He's very calculated. And these guys are coming from the Midwest now too. They're coming from the Big Ten, right? So
Caldwell's coming from Houston in the Big 12.
Caldwell's coming from Houston, but
Harmon's coming from Michigan State.
And I think there's really going to be some interesting stuff up front. The guy I'm really looking forward to is Mateo and Jordan Birch, because I feel like on the defensive side, you have to have that containment in the Big Ten. They're going to run the ball, and you got to keep the ball. You got to keep the running back on the inside of the tackle as much as possible. They start bouncing out, things get weird, because then obviously they can run inside out and run outside, and then now you're guessing. So if you can keep everything inside and do a really good job of that, I think that they can really be the tone setters on the defensive side and allow the other guys to work. You know, I think Jabbar Muhammad's going to be a guy who's going to be really, really highlighted, because when they do throw the ball in the Big Ten, they sometimes can make some big splashes. Those guys like to run, and then deke it over the top, right? You're going to have great coverage out there. But I think it all starts on the defensive and offensive line. I think you nailed it. Great call with both Johnny and Josh, but I think Poncho in the middle, my guy Poncho, I think he's going to have a great year. Because I think also the thing about him is that they've given him the right to be able to be him. And I think that's going to be very unique. Have that 808 connection up the middle. Pretty sweet, man. Hawaii's going to be in the building.
Yeah, I like you mentioned Marcus Harper, because he's the most veteran starter on this offensive line. He's the only guy that has started on every offensive line Dan Lanning has had since coming over and being the head coach at Oregon. Now, Connerly, of course, didn't have that NFL decision, but Cornelius did, and he has NFL prospects, and Jordan Birch did as well. That's the guy I'd look to on the defensive line and say, that's your tone setter, because he's a veteran, he's a returner, he was productive last year. I think it starts with him to set the tone and allow these young guys like Mateo or Blake Purchase, Tatum Tuioti, like that trio, I think is just magnificently talented. The number of different personnel packages that Tony Tuioti and Tosh Lupoy and Dan Lanning can rotate in on that defensive line is so awesome. Like, you could have a jumbo package to stop the run just as easily as you could put a bunch of speed rushers on the field and say, hey, we're going to have Jordan Birch stand up and go over the center, and then we're just going to throw Mateo and Purchase and Tuioti at you, and then maybe blitz Jeff Boss or so. Like, I just think the options there are fantastic. And I think it all starts with Jordan Birch, who's playing his final year of college football.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I think that the attitude that Coach Lupoy and Coach Lanning both have about trying to send pressure to the quarterback with a variety of different looks. They're still trying to get 4 people to rush, but those 4 people change over time. I totally agree with that. One more thing about Harper. Marcus Harper also came in as a center early on in his career, played a lot of center for Oregon, and was the guy who made all the calls to the offensive line and the quarterback. His freshman year, he had the vest on. He's doing all the calls with the headset on, having the offensive coordinator in his ear, making calls. It felt like he was a guy who was already elevating himself at a very early age, being one of the more intelligent guys out there, to where when he got his time to be on the field, didn't skip a beat. I mean, once his opportunity opened for him, he knew everything what he needed to know. So I definitely think that adds to the fact that Mark being the biggest leader on that group.
Rian Winter, Sports Chat 503. Nobody I would rather have on a weekend show that, as you're listening to or watching this, Friday, not necessarily the weekend, might be for some of you, but as you're listening to or watching this, I'm in the wonderful, beautiful place of Roche Harbor. Technology is great. Ryan, appreciate the time. As always, my man. Great to see you and hope you're enjoying the coast.
Appreciate you so much, Spencer. Thanks for everything you do for the Ducks and for college football. You're the man.
I try my very best. Speaking of college football, thanks for making Locked On Ducks your first listen. Go make Locked On College Football your second. I got you covered with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. Whatever is happening, got you covered, getting you ready for the season. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Have a great weekend. And as always, go Ducks.